Chapter 7, Health and Human Services, Sacrificial Lambs. Tonight we're talking, this is Chapter 7, and it's all kind of about, health and human services, hold on one second, really he's talking about is a lot of privatization. So I was going to go through, let me see, put this on and take this off. Okay, so I'm going to go through an old thread of mine from Twitter. I did this 7.5 years ago, so October 2017, I put this thread out. And it was about neoliberalism, because at that time we had a lot of, how we get a lot of Democrat liberals, going at us here. Like, they were still in there. They were very unhappy that Hillary lost. And one of the things we kept calling them that summer were neoliberals, because Hillary's a neoliberal. So we kept calling, the people that supported her neoliberals, and that made a couple of people upset. That was Joanne Reed was one of them, and this woman, Neera Tanden, who, I don't know if you know who Neera Tanden is or not, but Neera Tanden worked for Bill Clinton, and then she was supporting Hillary, but she was the head of the Centers of American Progress or something like that. And, a lot of the policies that they were putting out, a year after this thread, they put out that Medicare, instead of Medicare for all, they were Medicare Plus for all, or Medicare something else for all. And it was all a privatized, the whole thing was a neoliberal policy. So they were complaining that we didn't know what neoliberalism was. So I put this out. So we'll go through it. And I'll probably have to add a couple of things into it. So in the first slide, I say neoliberalism's policy model of social studies and economics, giving control of economic factors to the private sector from the government. So this Joseph Schwartz is a writer. He says neoliberalism is a form of capitalism in which the state deregulates the economy, destroys unions, decreases taxes on the rich and corporations, and defunds public goods while repressing and policing the poor, particularly people of color. And then these were kind of some factors. And, we discussed these. These can fall into the 14 signs, too, if you really look at them. So it's actively favors big business interests and the wealthy, removes the protections of labor law. So you always have that, strengthening business and weakening labor, guts welfare, eliminates social services, police power, incarceration are instruments of social policy, free trade policies empower corporations to seek cheap labor and resources, and then the military force used to repress opposition both at home and abroad. So then I say neoliberalism supports fiscal austerity, deregulation, free trade, privatization, and greatly reduce government spending. Okay, and this next was not in the thread, but I just wanted to add it, a merger of state and corporate power. So that is what fascism is. According to the man who first used the term. Okay. Or used the term as a political thing. Okay. So it's the 20th century's resurgence of the 19th century ideas associated with laissez-faire economics. I say, but the next, kind of over the next few decades, the popularity of the idea of neoliberalism tapered off. Here is where I would have added, probably 1920s, 30s, Italy in 1930s, Germany definitely was kind of, it's very hand in hand. It's very close. Pretty much the same thing. But now this goes into Pinochet. So the only to reemerge again in the 70s and 80s connected to the Chilean economic reforms issued by Pinochet. Okay, so then At this time, the meaning of the term shifted to more radical, laissez-faire capitalist group of ideas. So it was basically they really try to tie it in the privatization in this, like it was a much stronger idea by the 70s, like solidified and stuff like that. So I would mention, I'm going to mention that Jimmy Carter actually did usher in, but it couldn't go as far back. Like the groundwork was really laid by Nixon, kind of on the privatization stuff. But it's associated with the economic policies introduced in the UK by Margaret Thatcher and in the United States by Ronald Reagan. Two great people there. And Thatcher's slogan, Tina, there is no alternative, was originated by Herbert Spencer, another fan of laissez-faire economics. And just to further who Herbert Spencer is, Herbert Spencer was the father of social Darwinism. So social Darwinism is basically what heightened racism, eugenics, a whole bunch of things, with them just not understanding, exactly what Darwin was getting at with the whole thing. He was not looking at individuals. They took Darwin's survival of the fittest, talking about a species, and applied it individually throughout a species, which is not what the point that Darwin was trying to make. Okay, so the term was meant to indicate that the market economics was the only answer. So deregulation is good, if not God. That actually was a line that Laura Flanders said about the whole thing. So Reaganomics was based on the trickle-down theory. Problem with that is those at the top are too greedy to share. So the principle that the poor who must subsist on table scraps dropped by the rich can best be served by giving the rich bigger meals. And this is William Blum, is a writer and journalist. All right, so basically the rest of the thread will list why neoliberalism is bad. This is actually a pretty decent article if you want to look that up on The Guardian from 2017 about neoliberalism, the idea that swallowed the world. Okay, so neoliberals do not adhere to the typical right-left politics, so they can be Democrats or Republicans or independents. They definitely have to be capitalists. They're definitely going to be capitalists. I don't know why, Rick. Yeah, I don't get a lot of traffic here. Which, I don't know. I'm going to try to figure out how to push it a little better, but yeah, the traffic has been horrible here. So, all right. So some of its largest supporters from back in the 80s are now questioning the damage done. So this was from Fortune magazine, and it was the IMF deputy director, Jonathan Austrie, and division chief, Longani, I'm sorry, the print's so small for me, and there's an economist for Siri, who, all work with the IMF, and they're saying neoliberal economic policies have resulted in increased inequalities and stunted economic growth. All right. And this is I wanted to bring up the Jimmy Carter aspect of it because you can see this is where it really pulls. This is where the inequality was just skyrocketing. All right. So it opened doors for privatization of prisons, education, healthcare, to name a few. So it's underfunding them, undermining them, and overtaking them. When greedy people start looking for ways to profit off people's misery, you get things like overcrowded prisons. The corporations funding schools then dictate what is taught, and making cookie cutter adults who buy into the neoliberal ways. And once again, just this is a theme throughout this book too. And I don't know if you're picking up on it, but in my third read of it, I am definitely picking up on it that it shows a lot that individualism is not really happening in the United States. Like we don't have individualism. We want people to conform to be good little workers, and that's what we do. All right, so America's current healthcare system is a perfect example of what neoliberalism brings to the table. And the costs for healthcare are through the roof, and people can't afford it. So back then, I was all in my, Medicare for all days, and mainly like that was my big push, was that like, so back in 2016 when Hillary lost, they're like, oh, do you feel good that Trump won because all you wanted was healthcare? Like that was our one thing, and so goes it for 2024. The same, they were saying the same thing, but about not wanting a G side, So, in fact, neoliberalism may just be unaliving us. So this is neoliberalism is unaliving us, economic stress as a driver of global depression and, and the other thing. So, all right. Okay, this next slide, I wouldn't normally use this man anymore, but he's right on this one, so I kept it in. It is completely undemocratic. The very design of neoliberal principles is a direct attack on democracy. Noam Chomsky said in Hopes in Prospects. Okay. This is Jeremy Corbyn, creates bigger gaps in inequality. Jeremy saying inequality is a terrible waste of our time, a waste of people's resources. Okay, the neoliberal diet, and you see the guy, the big middle class, and then the middle class is just a myth. It was always a myth, so it's gonna go up and down like that anyways, because they just use that as a buffer to protect the rich. So it gives the corporations power over people, and as we learned, it was way back when they started doing the corporations in the Gilded Age, they started pushing that a corporation was a person or an entity, that deserved protection. So so we get that a corporation's now a person, and more important than normal people, I guess. And then it isn't much better than a fascist society. And it's just all bright and cheery. Okay, neoliberalism is the root for many, if not all, our problems today, and paved way for the Trump presidency. And then here's what policing looks like in a neoliberalistic state. This is Spain in 2012. And the corporate Democrats keep holding to the neoliberalism. They move away from actually helping people. So, of course, I have to do my little at the end, because it was the liberal Democrats saying we did not know what neoliberalism was. So this was Joy Ann Reid saying, so when corporate Dems try to say that we don't know what neoliberalism is, and she's actually kind of saying like we're weaponizing it against women and women of color, and that was not the case. But because it was Hillary running, then we were weaponizing it, and we were being racist and sexist. So this is my friend Pat and his parody account, and he said, love it. Let me know when you fill in the gap between them saying neoliberalism is bad and hating women of color. I struggle with that part. Okay, so let's remove this, put that back on, and remove that. And I think we can listen to part 1 now, if I can get over there. Had too many things open. Okay, I'm going to put on part 1, and we're going to listen to that now. I'll be back in a few minutes. Nope. 87. Okay, here we go.
Chapter 7. Health and Human Services. Sacrificial lambs. The plutocracy rules, but not always in the way it would like. Those of wealth and power must make occasional concessions, giving a little in order to keep a lot, taking care that the worst abuses of capitalism do not cause people to agitate against the capitalist system itself. Through much of the 20th century, democratic forces pressed their fight against economic and social injustice. In response, the federal government initiated a limited series of human services. Since the 1980s, even these inadequate but important gains have come under attack. The poor get less. Federal programs frequently fail to reach those most in need. The Special Supplemental Food Program for women, infants, and children assists only about half of those eligible. In 1996, a law supported by President Clinton phased out aid to families with dependent children. Millions of indigent families were denied food stamps and child nutrition assistance. In 2005, cuts in food stamps left an estimated 40,000 children ineligible for free or reduced-price school lunches. Many elderly poor were ejected from private nursing homes once their federal checks stopped coming in. Many people with mental or physical impairments were cast onto the streets to go hungry, searching out soup kitchens and food banks run by churches and other charities. In recent years, private charity has been unable to keep up with the increasing numbers of destitute people. Health and Human Services, Sacrificial Lambs 75. Over the last 25 years, funds were slashed from school breakfast programs, legal services for the poor, remedial education, maternal and child health care, and assistance to the aged, blind, and disabled, causing severe hardship for many. Programs employing hundreds of thousands of people, mostly women, to staff daycare centers and offer services to the disabled and aged have been abolished. The Reagan administration cut supplemental security income, the safety net for low-income disabled persons, including children. By 2000, at least one-third of those needing SSI were no longer being reached. Disabled recipients of SSI were denied their federal and state cost of living increases for 2006 by President Bush. That same year, Bush proposed a $2.7 trillion budget containing record allocations for the military, overseas wars, and corporate subsidies. But funds for domestic programs were reduced, including student grants, drug treatment, daycare, air traffic safety, emergency rescue, care for national parks, health research, and Medicare. Bush attempted to eliminate the commodity supplemental food program that provided food to the elderly poor and low-income mothers with young children, thereby saving $107 million, an amount equivalent to what the Pentagon spends or misplaces in 3 hours. The recession of 2008-2009 has brought additional reductions in human services, creating more hunger, isolation, and unattended illness for those with the fewest economic resources and the least political clout. The picture is no brighter at the state and local levels. Because of drastic cuts in federal grants, many states had to reduce their healthcare, housing, education, and family assistance programs. Contrary to prevailing myths, most recipients of family assistance are white, less than 1% are able-bodied men, over 95% are U.S. citizens, not illegal aliens, and most stay on welfare for not more than 2 years. Recipients do not live in luxury. Their allotments are far below the poverty level. In the United States, consumer debt reached a record high by 2002 and doubled in size from 2001 to 2008. The standard view is that people go heavily into debt because they are addicted to shopping and overspending. In fact, a nationwide survey found that a large majority of personal bankruptcies are related to illness and costly medical expenses. About 75% of these had private health insurance that provided inadequate coverage. Other major causes of personal debt include loss of job, small business failure, and loss of the family breadwinner. Facing financial emergencies, people with poor credit standing often turn to corporate lenders who charge predatory fees and usurious interest rates, amounting to 40% and higher. Debt itself creates more debt. As soon as a monthly payment is missed, penalty fees are piled on and the debt is compounded. New bankruptcy laws in 2005 made it virtually impossible for debtors to wipe the slate clean by declaring bankruptcy. Instead, they face a debtor's prison without walls, with heavy garnishment on future earnings, consigning them to decades of financial hardship.
Okay, so that was section 1. What am I going to talk about for section 1? All right, so the poor get less and less. I wanted to look at how people go hungry in a capitalist economy, and in particular one that overproduces. In short, the issue boils down to affordability. People just can't afford the food available. During the COVID pandemic, hunger spiked globally as economic instability left millions unable to afford food, despite sufficient production. This contradiction shows the systemic failures in distribution and access under capitalism because profit-driven systems prioritize market efficiency over equitable food security. To solve hunger, we must address the core issues, and capitalism is a system that thrives off desperation, so is unable to solve the issue. It can only be bandaged up for a bit with social programs, which are not socialism because the workers still don't own the means of production. Have to throw that in there all the time. They are just used to get capitalism through a crisis, which stems from overproduction, and then are griped about by the capitalists until they are watered down or discarded. And then we get up and do it all over again, that lovely capitalist business cycle. Why do capitalist economies overproduce food? Profit. But also, capitalism's decentralized production model lacks the ability to align output with equitable distribution, which just continuously leaves us in cycles of surplus and scarcity. So there's this, from like the 1930s, there's this thing they call the coal miner's riddle. So basically it's the daughter comes home and says to the coal miner, the father, Dad, it's really cold in the house. Why is it so cold? And he's like, well, I couldn't afford to go get the coal to heat the house because I lost my job because we produce too much coal. So that is the coal miner's riddle. It's the person who went in and dug that coal out is now, they have a surplus of it, so they get rid of him, and he can't even afford the work that he did, like pulling that out. He can't even afford the coal that he actually worked to get. But getting back to food, people going hungry is hardly ever because of a lack of food. This is from a Truth Out interview with the author of A Foodie's Guide to Capitalism, Understanding the Political Economy of What We Eat. And his name is Eric Holt-Gimenez. So he says, I think one of the most remarkable things about what COVID has done to the food system is that it helped to perpetuate it as it is. I mean, I don't think that COVID has significantly changed our food system at all, other than to exacerbate some of the inequities and externalities. And what I mean by that is when the lockdowns first hit, there was tremendous disruption to the food supply chain globally, especially in the United States. Restaurants were closing, food wasn't being sold to restaurants, the food wasn't being distributed to schools and other institutions. It was backing up all the way down the supply chain. So like all this food that was happening, and there was people, the food couldn't get to the people. We had no way of getting the food to the people. We also began to see that food and farm workers were some of the first to get seriously ill, in large part because our processing plants, especially meat processing plants, were refusing to shut down and to socially distance, basically calculating that there were enough poor immigrant workers that they could draw from. They could simply sacrifice the workers that they had because there's always someone to take their place. So tremendous disruptions in the food supply chain, but it adjusted itself very quickly, actually. We don't see scarcities now. There was some panic buying at first, but once that was over with, we didn't really see scarcities in the United States on a global scale. There's plenty of food to go around. So he's saying, oh, but, the system now, but... my question to that is then why in 2022 did 21,000 people die from starvation in the United States? That is, the question we got to ask. Obviously, capitalism cannot handle getting everyone fed, or cares to handle getting everyone fed, I guess. All right, let's go to section 2.
Social insecurity, privatizing everything. Plutocrats do not lightly tolerate a non-profit public sector that creates jobs, tax revenues, and fulfills human wants while engendering no profits for corporate America. So the owning class pushes for privatization of public services and resources, both within the United States and throughout the world. Social security has long been under intense fire from the privateers. A little over half the $500 billion or so that annually goes into Social Security comes out of employees' paychecks. The rest must come from employers, which is a major reason why the latter so dislike the program. For the last 35 years, opponents of Social Security have been predicting that the retirement fund will soon go broke because of the growing number of seniors. They urge that employees be allowed to invest their Social Security payments in the stock market where it supposedly will grow at a faster rate, leaving everyone with ample fortunes when they retire. Nothing is said about the portion now contributed by the employer. But the stock market is not a pension program. It is a form of gambling that could prove risky to many unpracticed retirees. Stock markets can crash without quickly bouncing back. After the crash of the Great Depression, stocks did not regain their 1929 highs until 1954. If retirement funds were transferred into millions of private accounts on the stock market, Wall Street brokerage firms would make billions of dollars in fees every year, but Social Security as a pooled system of payments, a collective insurance fund and safety net, would come to an end. When calculating the bountiful returns that retirees allegedly would glean from stock investments, privateers use rosy projections about a continually booming market. But when predicting bankruptcy for Social Security, they switch to pessimistic projections of a low-growth economy with abnormally low payments into the fund. In fact, far from going broke, Social Security produces enormous surpluses. From 1983 to 2005, Americans paid $1.8 trillion more in Social Security taxes than were paid out in benefits. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the Social Security Trust Fund will remain solvent until at least 2052.6. Social Security is the only federal program that produces about $150 billion yearly surplus, the only program that shows every sign of being self-supporting and solvent for over 30 years to come, yet is repeatedly described by its enemies as being in danger of insolvency. Whatever the size of the trust fund, Social Security's yearly intake should be able to meet benefit payments indefinitely. If there actually were to be a shortfall 30 or 40 years hence, it could easily be met by extending the Social Security tax to income earnings above $90,000, which was the cap as of early 2006, and eliminating the 100% exemption on unearned income. We already know what happens when government pension funds are privatized. In Chile, when a right-wing government privatized the country's retirement plan, Chileans soon discovered that the substantial deductions taken from their paychecks left them with only one-third the benefits that the old government plan had provided. The private companies that managed the pension funds gobbled up some 30% of workers' contributions in fees and administrative costs, raking in high profits even in years when individual accounts lost money. Many workers dropped out of the private plan because the deductions were too large, the returns too chancy, and the retirement checks too meager. Countries that followed the Chilean model ended up with equally dismal results. Social Security in the United States is not merely a retirement fund, it is a three-pronged insurance program that spreads risk and resources across society. It consists of retirement pensions for over 30 million seniors and their spouses, survivors insurance for over 3.5 million children of deceased or disabled workers, until they reach the age of 18, disability insurance for 4 million persons of all ages who suffer serious injuries and impairments. The privatizers say nothing about providing for survivor and disability insurance. Opponents of Social Security claim that it allows the elderly to live off the labor of the young, because it is the young who are paying into the program and the elderly who are taking from it. In fact, retired parents who receive public assistance and Medicare are less likely to become a burden to their children. Without Social Security, 14 million more seniors and disabled would sink below the poverty level, many into abject destitution. Although free marketeers insist that Social Security doesn't work, what really bothers them is that it does. It is one of the most successful anti-poverty and human services programs in U.S. history. In over 6 decades, it has never missed a payment. Its administrative costs are only about 1% of annual payouts. By comparison, administrative costs for private insurance are about 13%. Social Security helps the many instead of the few, redistributing billions of dollars in a more egalitarian not-for-profit fashion. This is why the program's opponents persistently demand that it be reformed, that is, eliminated.
Okay, so that was section 2. Let me just bring up my notes. Social insecurity, privatizing everything. So I had talked about the 401k. I brought that up. I don't know if it was last chapter or the chapter before, but the 401k program sprung out at the beginning of the United States neoliberal era and is the epitome of a neoliberal program itself. It put the burden of saving for retirement onto the already exploited worker and helped grow Wall Street. In a previous chapter, I brought up how Ted Benna, the father of 401k, even claimed it became a big money boost for Wall Street. He even admits his baby is what brought us the monstrous financial firms like BlackRock and Vanguard today. These companies went from being small mom and pop shops to giant beasts that have shares in everything. And we saw that too when we were looking at the media stuff. The initial 401k plan was simple. You had a couple options, but these firms complicated things and raised fees up to make more money off of workers. And it's not just the fees. Overall, the 401k retirement plans have significantly channeled capital to Wall Street primarily through their structure as long-term investment vehicles tied to financial markets. Here's how that happens. So market-linked investments like 401k accounts are heavily invested in stocks, mutual funds, and other market-related securities. Contributions from millions of participants create a large, steady stream of capital that flows into these investments, directly boosting Wall Street's asset base. The use of mutual funds pools the smaller investors' money together. These funds are managed by financial institutions, which then invest in equities and other things. This structure funnels trillions of dollars from people just trying to save for their retirement and puts them into the markets. Then Wall Street firms charge management fees, administration costs, and trading revenues from overseeing these 401k investments. These fees do not go away in market downturns, so not only does the small investor lose part of their savings, the fees are continuing, which make the firms a constant profit because fees are just another exploitation of the people. When the market is volatile, people will increase trading by adjusting their portfolios and then get charged transaction fees. And the 401ks are typically locked in until retirement, which provides these Wall Street firms long-term capital. All this just makes Wall Street richer. We can look at, just in the recent months, a lot of that was getting brought up with the tariffs and everything, and it hasn't really settled down, so we can't see like how much money Wall Street has really made off of that yet. But we probably will be seeing a boost from them. So yeah, they're making a lot off the fees themselves, are keeping them stable during any of this volatile time for everyone else. So, all right, let's listen to section 3 is a sick health system.
A sick health system. Healthcare in the United States is in a very unhealthy condition. Too often the first examination patients undergo is of their wallets. Public hospitals are closing down for lack of funds. Patients are ejected in the midst of an illness when they run out of money. People with prolonged illnesses are frequently bankrupted by medical bills despite supposedly comprehensive private coverage. The care people are receiving is not getting better, only more expensive. To maximize profits, hospital staffs are cut and overworked, sometimes to the point of being unable to give proper care. Contrary to the myth that private enterprise can do it better, death rates and patient expenses are higher at private hospitals than at nonprofit ones. The Institute of Medicine estimates that up to 98,000 Americans die annually because of preventable medical errors. Iatrogenic illness kills additional tens of thousands every year. The Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that 2 million hospital patients contract infections every year and nearly 100,000 die as a result. In addition, there are an estimated 300 million. We both think you need surgery, but we have to get a third opinion from an accountant. Medication errors yearly, along with faulty diagnoses, equipment failures, surgeries on the wrong limb or organ, wrong blood type transfusions, and misplaced or misread tests. A Justice Department investigation revealed that in 1 year thousands of patients underwent unnecessary surgical and diagnostic procedures for which doctors filed more than $1 billion in insurance claims. Too many hospitals are cost-cutting profit mills, providing substandard care for the highest possible prices. Even when patients are given the correct drug in the right dosage, highly deleterious or even lethal side effects can occur. Just about all drugs have a toxic component. Many of them are not adequately tested before distribution. Excessive reliance on medical drugs kills more Americans than all illegal narcotics combined. Even vaccinations have come under serious challenge for being insufficiently tested and delivering ill effects upon thousands of recipients, especially children. The United States has 2 federal health programs that have served the public well: Medicaid, which pays for medical treatment for the poor, and Medicare, which pays much of the medical cost for the aged and disabled. Since Congress and the states began cutting back on welfare in 1996, about 1 million low-income people have lost Medicaid coverage. Then in 2005 a Republican-led Congress passed a bill requiring millions of low-income people to pay higher copayments and premiums under Medicaid. The result was that many more indigents had to forego care. About one-third of those adversely affected were children. Both programs have occasionally been subjected to abuse when some doctors and hospitals overcharged the government enormous sums, while rendering inferior care. In one instance certain swindlers formed scores of phony medical companies in order to bilk Medicaid and Medicare of hundreds of millions of dollars for services and equipment that were never provided. Nursing homes care for nearly 2 million elderly and disabled, ringing up from $80 billion to $90 billion in business each year, with more than 75 cents of every dollar picked up by the taxpayer through Medicaid and Medicare. The less the nursing home spends on patient care, the more it keeps for its managers and shareholders. Profit-driven nursing homes have become the shame of the nation, with their insufficient and poorly trained staffs, filthy conditions, and neglect and abuse of patients. Top corporate executives and their families experience a different kind of health system from ordinary folks. They generally are provided with complete health coverage by their companies. They pay no deductibles and virtually no premiums for medical visits and hospitalization, while enjoying state-of-the-art treatment at the very best private hospitals in luxury suites. The medical industry is the nation's largest and most profitable business, with an annual health bill of $1 trillion, or 14% of the gross domestic product. The industry's greatest beneficiaries are big insurance companies and health maintenance organizations. These are profit-driven private companies that charge steep monthly premiums while underpaying their staffs and requiring their doctors to spend less time with each patient, sometimes withholding costly, even if necessary, treatment. Most HMOs pay doctors only a small fixed yearly fee per patient, no matter how many visits or treatments are needed. Doctors, whose reputation for compassion and excellence attract a large share of the sickest patients, are feeling increasingly demoralized because they cannot make a living on fixed HMO fees when trying to treat those who need extensive care. Many HMOs claim a non-profit status, ostensibly because they are engaged in a public service mission, even though they run a highly profitable business. As non-profit organizations, they avoid paying income taxes and property taxes.
Okay, so that was section 3, and what I'm going to do now is actually read from the book I just got, because this was his 2015 Profit, Pathology, and Other Indecencies. I have not read through it all. I've read some of the essays in it. Some of the essays I read before I got the book, but I just got the book, and it was one of he has like over 20 books. I went through a little while ago and tried to read almost all his books and probably get through about 15 of them. And couldn't find some of them. So this one, this is from his personal account, his Free Market Medicine, a personal account. So he talks about how he went to go get surgery, and it was during a time where the nurses were going on strike and stuff like that. So he has a story about that. But the part I'm going to read to you is called Class Care. Our health system mirrors our class system. At the base of the pyramid are the very poor. Many of them suffer through long hours in emergency rooms, only to be turned away with a useless or harmful prescription. No wonder the United States has the worst record among industrialized nations in treating preventable deaths. Recent reports shows that hospitals still overcharge the poor. The Affordable Care Act, ACA, Obamacare, was supposed to rectify that situation. The charge master at many hospitals is a list of hugely inflated prices that no one could explain or defend. And as of early 2014, with the ACA in place, there still were no restraints on hospital bill collections or charge master charges for the neediest patients. Healthcare is one thing, health coverage is another. The for-profit health coverage system buries patients in mountains of red tape to provide coverage. There are premiums to consider, along with co-payments, waivers, rate hikes, surcharges, service charges, exclusions, late fees, and markups. Hospital billing varies wildly. In one Dallas hospital, the average charge for treating simple pneumonia was $14,600, while another Dallas hospital averaged more than $38,000 for the same treatment. A medical center in Arkansas charged $15,524 for a surgical spine fusion, while the same operation at Temple University Hospital in Philadelphia averaged $219,273. At times, identical treatments in the very same hospital may result in a strikingly different bill. The uninsured have virtually no bargaining power, which is why they are expected to pay much more than others in the same hospital. Free market medicine has developed into an inequitable, perilous feeding frenzy. Sorry, I'm like in a weird light here, so sorry. Feeding frenzy, often leaving the very poor with no care at all. The indigent simply die of whatever illness assails them because they cannot afford treatment. The free market is in action. An acquaintance of mine told me how her mother died of AIDS because she could not afford the medications that might have kept her alive. In Houston, I once got talking with a limousine driver, a young African-American man, who remarked sadly that both his parents had died of cancer without ever receiving any treatment. They just died, he said. Living just above the poor in the class pyramid are the much admired and much pitied middle-class denizens. Despite the Affordable Care Act, their medical burdens seem not to have lightened all that much, in some cases not at all. They watch medical coverage disappear while paying out costly amounts to the profit-driven insurance companies. I was able to get surgery at Alta Bates only because I was old enough to have Medicare and had enough disposable income to meet the co-payment. For my outpatient hernia operation, the hospital charged Medicare $19,466. Of this, Medicare paid $2,527, and I was billed $644. The hospital then wrote off the unpaid portion. Had I no Medicare coverage, I would have had no to pay the entire $19,466. I was informed by the hospital that this larger amount covers only hospital costs for equipment, technicians, supplies, and room. So besides the $644, I will have to pay for any pathologies, surgical assistants, and anesthesiologists who performed additional services. I waited in my middle-class home for the other shoe to drop. Who is pocketing all the money that is pulled in by the health industry? Not the doctors. Working for Sutter, my surgeon makes about $400 to $500 for a hernia operation performed on me. This includes everything, my pre-op, my post-op visits, and the surgery itself. An exacting undertaking that requires skills of the highest order. He also has to maintain insurance, an office, an assistant, and an increasing load of paperwork. My surgeon pointed out to me, if you ask people how much I make on an operation like yours, they will say $4,000 to $5,000 and would be wrong by a factor of 10. He noted that in recent speech, President Obama criticized a surgeon for charging $30,000 to replace a kneecap. The surgeon gets a minute fraction of that amount, my doctor assured me. Almost all the big money in the healthcare racket goes to insurance executives and hospital executives. They outstrip doctors' earnings by more than 3 to 1 at places like Sutter Health, where general physician's annual salary averages $185,000, and that of a hospital executive is $600,000. But the gap is many times greater when we consider the additional non-salary compensations commonly handed out to the top executives. Thus, the chief executive at Aetna earned a salary of approximately $977,000 in 2012, but a total compensation package of more than $36 million. The bulk from stocks, vested, and options. A former president of Barnabas Health in New Jersey earned a total compensation of $21.7 million that same year. To make matters worse, there was talk about cutting Medicare payments to physicians by 27%. If this happens, it will be increasingly difficult to find a surgeon who takes Medicare. Still worse, the private insurance companies will join in squeezing the physicians for still more profits, and I was able to meet my payment of $644, not only because my operation was heavily subsidized by Medicare, but because it was one-day ambulatory surgery. I fear now I would do if I had to undergo prolonged and extremely costly treatment. And sadly, he probably is in that right now. But anyhow, like I have a similar story. I've talked about how I lost everything. And even now, like with me on Medicare, I don't have a supplemental plan. I can't afford it. I'm disabled, on a fixed income. And, there's things that I forego. There's things I don't, get to do. So, hey, Moxie, how you doing? Let me see. My trip from the rural ER to the hospital in the city cost me $2,500. I am glad I had Medicaid. Yeah, that's another thing. I live in New England, so I have family that lives down in Rhode Island, and the medical centers are all up in Boston and stuff. So if they can't handle it down in Rhode Island, they send them to Boston, and that ends up costing people so much money to be transferred over, over to the hospitals in Boston from another state too. So that's been a little horrendous on my family because they've been having some issues. All right, so let me play section 4.
The health insurance racket. Free market proponents maintain that government should not be in the business of healthcare and that private insurance companies offer us more choice, quicker and higher quality service, all at a reasonable cost. Reality paints a different picture. Private insurers charge premiums that are prohibitively high for many Americans. About 50 million Americans are without health insurance throughout the entire year. Another 30 million have coverage that is so scanty as to leave them underinsured. 6 in 10 ailing Americans delayed or deferred necessary medical treatment in 2008, 2009 because of inability to pay. This included millions who were insured but whose plans did not cover needed services. About 20,000 of the untreated die each year from treatable illnesses. Health insurance premiums have been rising 5 times faster than wages over the last 8 years, devouring 1/4 or more of the average family's income. Since 1980, spending on healthcare in the United States has expanded 3 times faster than the overall economy's growth. In many cities, 1 or 2 health insurers dominate the market. Their monopolistic grip makes it easier for them to dictate low provider reimbursements while charging ever higher insurance premiums. To minimize payouts, insurance companies screen out applicants who are most likely to need care and seek to insure those least likely to get sick. The insurers frequently refuse to reimburse for expenses, arguing that the insured person had a prior condition or was not originally of perfect health. In his revealing documentary film Sicko, Michael Moore reports the case of a woman who was denied coverage for cancer surgery by her insurer because some years earlier she had had a prior condition, a yeast infection. Health insurance policies often contain unexpected qualifiers and disclaimers in small print, including numerous deductibles, add-ons, and co-payments that the patient must pay. Policyholders might discover too late that they owe huge sums because their insurance companies pay only for routine hospital care and not for surgery or lab tests. Insurance companies often refuse to pay for special procedures that are unusually expensive. They have been known to cancel the policies of those who become afflicted with protracted illnesses. A former senior corporate executive admitted to a Senate committee that the number of uninsured people has increased as more have fallen victim to deceptive marketing practices and bought what essentially is fake insurance. 22. Before Medicare was established in 1965 under President Lyndon Johnson, more than 40% of elderly Americans lacked any kind of health insurance. Today Medicare covers everyone 65 and over. Surveys show that Medicare recipients are much more satisfied with their coverage than other Americans are with for-profit private insurance. Of the Americans who do have some form of private insurance, the majority get it through their employers, who are able to write off the costs as tax deductions. But in return the government requires that employers must extend coverage to all their employees and not cherry-pick in the manner done by insurance companies in the individual policy market. Many firms, strapped for funds, are dropping insurance coverage for their workers. Healthcare reform is difficult and hugely expensive if left in the hands of the free marketeers. Many of the goals are impossible to attain without a single-payer system. Only single payer would enable us to drastically reduce administrative costs, relieve employers of the burden of carrying insurance, and provide a form of universal coverage that is affordable and available to all. This nation has 1,500 different health insurance programs. These private companies cost hundreds of billions of dollars a year. Private companies lay out huge sums for marketing, for screening out undesirable applicants, and for enormous salaries and bonuses to their top directors. A team of Harvard Medical School researchers estimated that a single-payer national health insurance could save at least $286 billion annually, enough to cover all the uninsured. Private health insurance companies spend 13% of premiums on administrative and overhead costs, compared to 3.2% spent for government-managed Medicaid and Medicare, or 0.9% for Canada's single-payer system, which got rid of health insurance companies almost 3 decades ago. Likewise, private drug plans have much higher administrative costs than would be incurred if Medicare administered the plan.
Okay, so we're at section 4. There is 8 sections today, so we are halfway through. So in 2023, the United States health insurance industry reported a 3% increase in net earnings to nearly $25 billion, with a profit margin of 2.2%. The largest insurers, like United Health Group, saw significant profits. United Health Group's profit reaching $23 billion in 2023. I don't even know if I'm supposed to be even talking about United Health Group, but there you go. They are privatizing Medicare as well without people even knowing. Medicare Advantage is being pushed as a supplement in Medicare does not cover all expenses. So this was like when my mom got sick, and like I didn't realize she was carrying a supplemental plan. I didn't realize that elderly people have to pay for more insurance. And when that happened, of course, the supplemental plan and Medicare were fighting who had to pay for what, and the supplemental plan dropped her right as she was supposed to be going into hospice and stuff like this. It was just horrendous. I was like, that is the one thing, dealing with this stuff when you're dealing with illness, even if it's for somebody else, it's just too much. And going for yourself, for being sick and having the extra stress, and one of the worst things for most illnesses is putting stress on yourself. So there's one good thing the ACA did, and that was to protect people who had pre-existing conditions. I had asthma, so I was having issues, from being denied insurance or forced to pay more for a policy. However, they still can't adjust for things like age and tobacco use. So they'll still hit you if they can. Having access never means affordable, so there are still people who cannot even afford to go to the doctor on a free plan because of the charges, or what we're talking about, even getting there, the cost of getting to the places and not knowing what will be and will not be covered. People are tied to horrible jobs just to have health insurance, and the ACA doesn't help this with their limited enrollment windows. Sorry. For me, I got on, I've talked about this, I was on my Mass Health. I was on Mass Health when I went disabled and lost my insurance. They kept dropping me every time I'd show up for an appointment. They would drop right before it. And then my pain management doctor out of pocket from my for my big insurance, when I was working in the insurance, I was paying $60 every time, and I had to go see him every 2 weeks because I was on medicine that I'd have to get a prescription for every 2 weeks. So I was spending, at least $120 a month just to go see him then. But then when Mass Health kept dropping me and I'd show up for my appointment, they're like, okay, that would be $285. I'm like, I don't know. can't see him today, I guess. So when they did that, it was 3 times they dropped me, and I finally was just when you're trying to go for disability, it's a long wait. It's a lot of hurdles. It's not easy. People aren't going on disability in any easy form. It's a lot to deal with, and it was 2.5 years before I couldn't work in that time. I couldn't do anything. I had no money coming in, and now basically had no insurance. So it was lovely. The denials of medicines and treatments while on insurance, the highest tier and I was paying for like the highest thing. I looked at like my costs of health. I made $55,000 a year. So with my health insurance taken out, I took home about 27, but my health insurance was over $800 a month. And so I took home only $27,000 a year. I was paying out like in average times like $15,000 out of pocket. Like that was like half my money, like just for, the appointments, looking at like parking, looking at, the travel costs, looking at, the co-pays and the medicines I was on and everything. It was a lot of money. All right. I'm going to play section 5 for us and we'll be back in a minute.
Their socialist medical menace. Free market reactionaries circulate all sorts of horror stories about the healthcare systems in Western social democracies and Canada. We hear that these government-run systems are in shambles, paralyzed by cold and impersonal bureaucracies that deny patients the opportunity to choose their own doctors, require long waits, and deliver expensive and inferior care. The truth is something else. As compared to the United States, people in Britain, Germany, Holland, Canada, and elsewhere are more likely to have a regular doctor and they can choose from a roster of physicians. They do have a choice. Waiting time is generally less than in the United States. No one in Canada or the European social democracies is kept waiting if they need emergency care or are facing a life-threatening problem. No one is denied medical care because of inability to pay. No one has to pay anything except occasionally for small fees. Everyone has universal coverage for both minor and major ailments. People in these countries do not lose their health care when they lose their jobs. No Danes, Swedes, Germans, Britons, Finns, Norwegians, Belgians, French, or Canadians are ever plunged into debt or bankruptcy because of medical bills. All these nationalized healthcare systems cost about half what is spent in the United States on healthcare, yet they offer excellent care and cover every illness. Any individual in any of these countries can pay for private insurance and private care if they so choose. It is in the United States, not the social democracies, that delayed care, even for emergency needs, is a common fact of life. Over 500 hospitals have violated a federal law that requires them to provide emergency care to anyone, regardless of ability to pay. Many postpone treatment until they can determine how the patient will pay the bill. Fines for such shabby practices are seldom imposed. No wonder surveys show that Americans overwhelmingly support substantial changes in their healthcare system, including a public plan choice. Although Canada and the other industrialized democracies spend only half as much as the United States on healthcare, they have lower infant mortality rates and healthier average populations with higher life expectancies. According to a World Health Organization report, U.S. healthcare costs the most while being 37th in quality. The U.S. government actually has a socialized medicine system that works quite well. It is the Veterans Health Administration, whose success story is one of the best-kept secrets in American politics. Once plagued by bureaucratic inefficiency and mediocre service, the VHA was upgraded in the 1990s. Today it repeatedly wins a level of client satisfaction superior to any accorded private health care. The VHA offers integrated coverage to veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces. It does not need an enormous administrative staff for promotional work or elaborate billings and payment accounts. The VHA took the lead in electronic record keeping and other innovations that reduce costs, ensure effective treatment, and help prevent medical errors. 27 Again proof that public health service outperforms private profit service. Another facet about Canadian healthcare is that its drugs are unreliable. In fact, drugs up north are no less safe than in the United States, just much less expensive. Most medicines in the United States are drastically overpriced. Pharmaceutical companies claim they need high prices to support innovative research, but they spend 3 times more on sales promotions than on research, while enjoying astronomical profits of $300 billion a year. The companies ply doctors with free drug samples, free food, free medical refresher courses that promote the company's pharmaceuticals, and payments for lectures that do the same. Most new drugs are just minor variants of existing ones. Federal budget analysts discovered that the active ingredients in many drugs often cost only pennies, whereas huge price tags are passed on to consumers. Thus 100 tablets of Prozac, a widely used antidepressant, cost the consumer about $247, but the active ingredients cost only 11 cents for the entire bottle. Health and Human Services, Sacrificial Lambs 83. Furthermore, pharmaceutical research is heavily subsidized by the government to the tune of over $15 billion annually. Most new drugs are patented after our tax dollars paid for their development. The government also finances the development of orphan drugs, which treat relatively rare diseases. Pharmaceutical companies refuse to develop such drugs. It's just not profitable enough for them. So the Orphan Drug Act of 1983 grants a 7-year market protection against any losses plus generous tax breaks to companies that developed medications for these relatively unusual diseases. Once again, the private sector serves a public need only when generously bribed by the public sector. The Bush administration pushed through a highly complicated compulsory drug benefit that will cost Medicare users $1 trillion in less than a decade, bringing vast profits to the pharmaceutical companies. Deductions to insure for medications are taken from the Social Security checks of seniors whether they choose to join or not. The law specifically prohibits Medicare from negotiating lower drug prices.
Okay, so that was section 5, and it's called the Socialist Medical Menace. All right, so I was involved with a few different groups that pushed for Medicare for all, like during the Bernie time. That's why I was supporting Bernie, because I went, I lost everything. I lost my, my home that I was living in. I lost, I couldn't pay for my car anymore. I couldn't pay for any of that stuff. I ended up having to move into my parents' house, which is fine. I was lucky. I'm one of the lucky ones that had somewhere to go, because there's plenty of people who don't. I was very involved in that aspect, because I was always, an advocate anyways for, the chronically ill people and stuff like that. I was trying to help people get on disability and stuff like that. So I was a victim of the system, being left homeless and without savings due to getting Lyme disease, which pushed out a disorder I have called Jerkham's disease. In that work, I met a doctor who happens to be a free market libertarian, but understood that healthcare cannot be on the free market. I like to bring him up when talking to libertarians about healthcare. I figure maybe, just maybe, since they will not accept the information from me, they would from one of their own. So if you ever if you're ever in the position of talking to a libertarian and you're talking about needing, single payer or universal or just, healthcare, you can bring up this guy. His name is Dr. Joseph Jarvis. And I'm going to just read a little bit from one of his blog posts here. He's with the Physicians for National Health Program. All right. So this is an opinion piece. Reforming healthcare is essential for national survival. I believe most Americans have some notion that healthcare costs are a problem in the United States. Just so you know, this was, sorry, a car just went by. This was from January of this year when he wrote this. So I believe most Americans have some notion that healthcare costs are a problem in the United States. This is because millions of Americans owe medical debt. 14 million Americans owe more than $1,000 in medical debt. This means that each of us likely knows someone who owes medical debt. Fewer Americans are aware that U.S. healthcare costs are far higher than anywhere else in the world. Americans spend just less than $15,000 per person on healthcare, nearly twice as much on average than other developed countries. So, they say that, it would cost us too much to go to a universal and single payer. But no, because we can look at the places that do have, those kind of programs, and they are paying like half as much as we are. So healthcare costs are rising faster than GDP growth, meaning that an ever-increasing part of our total economic output goes to the healthcare system, a trend that is clearly unsustainable. The vast majority of healthcare expenditures are paid by direct taxation or written off through federal or state tax policy. And Parenti talked about that too. Americans pay more taxes to support healthcare than do the citizens of other countries. These facts present an alarming scenario for all of us to consider. Our economy cannot continue indefinitely. So he gets into, now he kind of gets into more of the libertarian stuff. Like, we need to, if we want to save the economy, we need to get healthcare. So I'm just going to stop that there. But just so you know, there are, free market, and he was a doctor. That's one of their other things they talk about, is that, why would you hurt doctors? They need to be making money. But as we see, we read from Parenti, and we see, like, they don't get paid all that much that you think they get paid anyways. So there is that. The other thing I want to bring up here is a story of my friend Scott, actually his son Danny. His last name, and I am going to pronounce his last name wrong because I always pronounce his last name wrong. It's Desnoyers, but I know it's pronounced something different. I know it's not pronounced Desnoyers, but it's Scott Desnoyers. His story, he's had a story out there. His son was in his mid-20s. He suffered from bipolar. He was on medicine, and he went to go, like, he had like a Medicaid, but he had like a supplemental plan too. He went to go pick up his, antidepressants, and he was told, oh, you got shut off. So, like you saw the Prozac, like back in 2010 was $247. So, but this was like a newer medicine, so it was even more. You got shut off from your insurance. So, it was $20 copay you missed. You missed a $20 copay, so you can't have your medicine. The man was bipolar, and he couldn't have his medicine. And I don't know if any of you know what happens when you come down off of antidepressants without tapering down off them. You, especially if you have a condition like bipolar, that you have depression, is a key element. You usually fall really into that depression. And he ended up driving his car into a lake, and he had left a message on Facebook. His father saw, he even said, like, this is what I'm going to do. So his father got out in the car and just drove around, trying to, like, didn't know which, because there was a couple of lakes, and I depressing story, sorry. But it's a very, like, that is what happens in the United States. You miss a $20 copay, it can unalive you. It can, send you over the edge. So, well, let's start section 6. Maybe it'll be a little happier news. Probably not, but.
Buyers beware, and workers too. More and more biomedical research is funded by private companies. Doctors at some of the nation's leading medical schools have attached their names and lent their reputations to scientific papers drafted by ghostwriters employed by the drug companies. Such research is more likely to produce results favorable to the corporation that helped pay for it, often putting the consumer at risk. Consumer protection is generally scanty. The Food and Drug Administration tests only about 1% of the drugs and foods marketed. Toothpaste, shampoo, cosmetics, and other items are often contaminated with carcinogenic byproducts, yet the FDA has done little about it. Of the medical drugs it approves, an estimated half of them cause serious adverse reactions. When Monsanto introduced bovine growth hormone to induce dairy cows to produce abnormally high amounts of milk, the FDA approved the biotech wonder drug, even though consumer groups questioned its unknown effects on children and adults. Cows injected with BGH suffer from illness and malnutrition, making it necessary to augment their already high intake of antibiotics. The federal government already buys surplus milk supplies. The increase in milk production will cost taxpayers additional millions, mostly benefiting a few giant dairy producers. Factory farms around the country confine livestock in cages for the entire duration of their lives, where they are fed everything from ground-up animal parts to sewage sludge. Antibiotics are regularly pumped into these creatures to keep them from sickening, and to increase their weight through water retention. Antibiotics also create virulently resistant strains of bacteria for which there is no treatment. Over 9,000 human deaths occur each year in the United States due to foodborne illnesses. Consumer groups have been fighting to get the FDA to ban irradiated beef, which is sold at some fast food outlets and supermarkets, and has made its way into school lunches for children. Irradiated beef, which costs 13 to 20 cents per pound more than ordinary beef, has been found to contain toxic chemicals linked to cancer and genetic damage. One cannot talk about the health of America without mentioning occupational safety. Every year over 6,000 workers are killed on the job and 4.5 million are injured. Another 10,000 die later on from job injuries and 50,000 from occupational diseases caused by toxic chemicals, asbestos, pesticides, and solvents. Some 50,000 to 60,000 sustain permanent disability, and millions more suffer from work-related illnesses. Industrial work always carries some risk, but the carnage today is due mostly to inadequate safety standards and lax government enforcement of codes. Even in the most egregious cases, employers rarely face criminal prosecution. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration has only 2,043 inspectors to ensure safety for over 135 million workers at about 7 million workplaces. Employers file reports of injuries and fatalities on a purely voluntary basis, making existing statistics unreliable. When cited for violations, corporations sometimes find it less expensive to pay the relatively light fines than to improve safety conditions. The free market is a dangerous place for working people. If a company kills an employee through willful and deliberate endangerment, it is only a misdemeanor under federal law. Workers' compensation laws usually place the burden of proof on the injured employee, provide no penalties when industry withholds or destroys evidence, and impose a statute of limitation that makes it difficult to collect on work-related diseases that have a long latency period. Only about 10% of the millions of workers injured actually win any benefits, and those who do then forfeit their right to sue a negligent employer. Thus, to some extent, the government compensation program actually shields industry from liability. A decade of efforts in Congress to increase the $5.15 an hour minimum wage were stymied largely by Republican lawmakers and business groups who argued that a higher minimum wage would drive away jobs. Opinion polls showed widespread support for an increase in the federal minimum wage. With the advent of a Democratic Congress, in July 2009 the federal minimum wage law was advanced to $7.25 an hour, with time and a half pay for any hours over 40 a week. A 2009 study of Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York found that anywhere from 12% to 43% of low-wage workers were routinely paid less than the minimum wage, and many were denied proper overtime pay. African American women and immigrant workers were the most victimized. In addition, wage theft has reached epidemic proportions. Employers commit wage theft when they steal all or some portion of a worker's earnings by failing to pay time and a half overtime or any overtime at all, forcing workers to work extra hours off the clock for no pay under threat of losing their jobs, pocketing the money deducted for Social Security, and laying off. Health and Human Services, Sacrificial lambs 85. Workers without giving them the back pay owed to them. Corporations like Walmart, Allstate, and IBM have been forced to make multi-million-dollar settlements with tens of thousands of workers after bitter legal battles. Wage theft exceeds $19 billion annually and affects about 2 million workers, yet it goes largely unreported in the news media.
Okay, that was, Section 6, Buyers Beware and Workers Too. So I'm just going to read from an article, The Conversation, and it's about Trump's Doge campaign accelerates 50-year trend of government privatization. All right, so I'm not going to really read the first 3 paragraphs. I'm going to start at 3 indicators of privatization. At first glance, total government spending appears stable over time. In 2024, federal, state, and local expenditures made up 35% of the U.S. economy, and the same as 1982. However, my analysis of the Bureau of Economic Analysis data offers a new perspective, recasting privatization as a macroeconomic phenomena. I find that U.S. economic activity has become increasingly more privatized over the past 50 years. This shift happened in 3 key ways. So, Reaganomics, 50 years, like we said, neoliberalism started in the 70s, really. It really kind of, Richard Nixon kind of laid the work, and then Jimmy was bringing it in, and then it just went up from there. First, government involvement in economic production has declined. Historically, public institutions have played a major role in sectors such as electric power, water delivery, waste management, space equipment, naval shipbuilding, construction, and infrastructure investments. In 1970, government spending on production accounted for 23% of the economy. By 2024, that figure had fallen to 17%. leaving the private sector to fill the gaps. This means a growing share of the overall government spending has been used to fund the private sector economy. Second, government's overall ability to produce goods and services, what economists call productive capacity, has fallen relative to the private sector, both in terms of labor and capital. Since 1970, public employment has lagged behind private sector job growth, and government-owned capital assets have trailed those of the private sector. Although public sector capital investments briefly rebounded in the 2000s, employment did not, signaling a shift towards outsourcing rather than direct hiring. This has significant implications for wages, working conditions, and unionization. Third, and relatedly, government increasingly contracts work to private companies, opting to buy goods and services instead of making them. In 1977, private contractors accounted for 1/3 of the government production costs. By 2023, that has risen over half, and government contracting now is 7% of the total economy. Reached US $1.98 trillion in 2023. Key beneficiaries in 2023 included professional services at $317 billion, petroleum and coal industries at $194 billion, and construction at $130 billion. Other examples include private charter schools, private prisons, hospitals, and defense contractors. So the meaning of privatization can be understood as two interconnected processes: the retreat of government from economic production and the rise of contracting. The government remains a major economic actor in the U.S., although now as more of a producer of goods and services than a provider or employer. The government's shift away from the production largely stems from mainstream austerity politics, a starve the beast approach to government, and backlash against the New Deal's expansion of federal economic involvement. In 1971, the controversial Powell memo, written by future Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, mobilized business leaders around the goal of expanding private sector power over public policy. This fueled the rise of conservative think tanks, including the Heritage Foundation, and eventual architect of the Project 2025 privatization agenda. All right, so let's listen to section 7.
Creating crises, schools and housing. Economic inequality extends into the field of education. Wealthy districts often are allocated far more per pupil than less affluent districts. Poorer schools suffer from overcrowding and underfunding. Various lawmakers and commentators say we can't solve the public school problem by just throwing money at it. Strange to hear this from people who never tire of throwing titanic sums at the Pentagon in order to improve the kill capacity of the US military. A Rand Corporation study shows that more funds for smaller classes, preschool enrollment, classroom materials, and remedial services do improve the morale and performance of children from low-income families. Though not the only consideration, money, or the lack of it, is a core problem. Free marketeers seek to privatize public education by giving parents money vouchers that they could spend on any school of their choice, including parochial ones. The schools and teachers would not be certified and there would be no performance control. Anybody, qualified or not, could start a school to make some quick bucks from vouchers. One helpful federal program is Head Start. Children receive food, medical care, and remedial education, and their parents learn about nutrition and appropriate community programs. Only 3 of every 5 eligible children are enrolled in Head Start because the program cannot afford to accept more. Despite its success, a Republican administration decided to reform Head Start by cutting funds for child care, after-school and summer school programs, assistance to abused and neglected children, and treatment for substance abuse. President Bush initiated a program called No Child Left Behind, which forces teachers to prepare students for a standardized federal test. Schools that get enough students to pass are rewarded with more funds. Schools that fail are given less. Teachers complain of having to teach to the test, rather than encourage innovative and exploratory educational effort. Independent reading and imaginative projects are discarded. Critical thinking is discouraged. Teaching to the test involves memoizing pat answers. Thus in one school, students learn that something is a poem because it rhymes and has stanzas. Physical education, art, music, and even science are set aside in some schools. A host of self-appointed consultants sell packaged curricular and test boosters to the schools in what has become a billion-dollar industry. Principals and superintendents often obsess about meeting test levels lest their school budgets be cut. In 2003, nearly 170,000 high school graduates, among the top in their classes, had to forego college because they could not afford it. Students have had to rely increasingly on loans from banks and other private lenders that are underwritten by the federal government at great profit to the banks. Here is how socialism for the rich works. The taxpayers give the banks and other private credit companies billions of dollars with which to make loans to students. If the students pay back the loans with interest, the banks pocket these profits and use the repaid money for more loans. The loans that students fail to pay back are guaranteed by the taxpayers. The government buys back these bad debts from the banks and loan companies so that they neither sustain any losses nor carry any risks. The banks and loan companies collect on delinquent loans, using collection agencies that put liens on the wages and salaries that students might earn after graduation. Students often work hard to pay off the debts they owe so that the top executives of these private loan companies can continue to make multi-million-dollar salaries, use private jets, and frequent the most luxurious golf and spa resorts in the world. If the government itself may direct loans to college students, it would cost only 1/5 as much, but that would mean no profits for the banks and private loan companies. The White House estimates that it could save about $94 billion over 10 years if it cut out all the middlemen, and it has the basis of a system in place, since the Department of Education already makes a lot of direct loans to students. 46. In 2005 and 2006, the Bush Jr. administration cut hundreds of millions of dollars from the education budget, including funds for vocational training and programs for disadvantaged students. Meanwhile, the government gives significantly more financial aid to the wealthiest private universities than to needy community colleges and evening schools. Much federal aid also goes to medical schools and graduate and postgraduate science programs. So with housing, the bulk of federal housing assistance goes not to poor households but to affluent ones. Middle and upper-income homeowners receive tax deductions for the interest paid on their mortgages, and capital gains deferrals on housing sales, costing the government over $100 billion in revenues each year. This is several times more than what the Department of Housing and Urban Development is allocated for low-income housing. Upper-income people who own beachfront homes receive federally subsidized insurance that leaves the government liable for billions of dollars in claims. One such beneficiary was multimillionaire ex-President Bush Sr., who preached free market self-reliance while benefiting from federal insurance that covered most of the $300,000 to $400,000 worth of storm damage to his estate in Maine. Private housing developments built with government assistance are often rented to low-income people for a year or two to qualify for federal funds, then sold to other private owners who, not held to the original contract, evict the tenants and turn the units into high-priced rentals or condominiums. Every year, hundreds of thousands of low-cost housing units are lost to demolition, gentrification, and sales to private investors, as the crisis of affordable housing spreads across the United States. The government has two programs for low-income tenants. The first is public housing, which accommodates about 1.3 million families, half of whom collect some form of public assistance. Public housing projects plagued by drugs and gang crime have received a lot of media attention. But the many public housing projects, including ones for the elderly, that work fairly well receive little press notice. The other government housing program consists of Section 8 vouchers, which provide 1.5 million low-income families with rent subsidies. The family pays the landlord 30% of its income and the government pays the landlord the rest. Again, the public sector subsidizes the private profit sector. About half of the million or so low-income households that receive rent vouchers return them unused because affordable apartments are unavailable. Only 1/4 of poor U.S. households get any kind of housing subsidy, the lowest level of any industrialized nation. Rents have soared far above incomes in many parts of the country, further shrinking the supply of affordable housing. Millions of Americans not classified as homeless double up, or pay more than they can comfortably afford for cramped, substandard quarters. Tens of thousands of low-income Americans have been excluded from public housing for minor offenses that may have occurred years ago, or for merely being arrested, though not convicted of anything. The reduction in public housing funds over the last 25 years remains the major cause of homelessness. Many cities are passing ordinances that make it a crime to sit or lie in a public place with a sleeping bag or shopping cart. Homeless people are harassed, roughed up and arrested, driven from one town to another, their few possessions confiscated and destroyed, their makeshift campgrounds and other sleeping spaces sealed off. Their homeless have an inordinately high rate of untreated physical and psychological illnesses. In 2008, 2009, during the subprime mortgage scandal, millions of working families were dispossessed of their homes by the duplicitous practices of predatory lenders and investors. Many ended up doubling up with relatives or living in low-rent hovels or tent cities, only adding to the housing crisis in America. Early in its first year in office, the Obama administration announced the Making Home Affordable program, a comprehensive plan intended to assist some 7 to 9 million homeowners by reducing mortgage payments to affordable levels and preventing avoidable foreclosures. The program was designed to restore the housing market, shore up its slumping values and prices, and ease the impact and frequency of foreclosures, without eliminating foreclosures or restoring ownership to the many who lost their homes.
Okay, I have to say one thing. I like how the Speechify Irish guy says subsidize. It just makes me laugh. I don't know. So that was section 7. We only have one more section left. So if anyone wants to come up, you can request probably in about the next 5 minutes or when I get through with this and we do the last section. So section 7 is creating crisis, schools and housing. So speaking of Bush's No Child Left Behind, all right, so my brother has become a teacher. Like, so he's not like a full teacher. He teaches kind of like a teacher aide or something like that. He started like during COVID. He was working as an accountant and he just needed to get out of that kind of job. So he started teaching and it was with autistic children. And he's really good with these children and stuff. But I was so like talking about side-eyeing because I was so like, what? When he was like, yeah, they have to take the standardized test that every other kid has to take. I'm like, that doesn't seem right. Like some of them are really good test takers, but you know, I mean, he's dealing with ones that just don't have the focus and everything. And I'm like, I mean, I know how I hated taking tests. I have ADHD and I hated taking tests. So I don't even know why they put, the standardized testings are just so, so weird to me. I don't know. But that was, off topic. So, I also want to note here too that Parenti really, really, really hated the Bushes. So you understand that. He really just did not like either of them. He talks more about them than Reagan and stuff too, even in the, in the 80s and 90s. In the 90s, he was, really talking about Bush Sr. a lot. So in March 2025, the town of Johnston, Rhode Island, used eminent domain to acquire land intended for a 252-unit affordable housing complex. The town's Democratic mayor, Joseph Policina Jr., his father was also in politics, so justified the move by claiming the land was needed for a new public safety complex and municipal building, which just means yet another cop city. The developers of the affordable housing project argue that the town is abusing eminent domain to block the project. So, as we know, eminent domain is the state's right to take property. This is why communists laugh in the face of people who actually think they have all rights to their property. Rhode Island had a count of about 2,500 homeless people in January 2024, but that number, it was noted that it's been rising. And Rhode Island sits at the top with the highest rate of chronic patterns of homelessness. So what that means, chronic homelessness means like that you're doing prolonged periods, like over a year of homelessness. It's usually someone that has an illness. That's how they look at it. So they have, out of the whole country per capita, they have a higher rate than other places. The first town meeting, hold on a second. Sorry. The first town meeting about this was called much in the same way as the second one was, a short notice, but what happened is they stacked the room with cops and people who work, like the fire department and stuff, people that worked for the mayor in the town, and they denied the citizens from coming in to speak against it. So The Rhode Island AG's office found the council violated Open Meeting Act, so they needed to have the meeting again. They did the same thing. They stacked the meeting, and then the council decided they took a unanimous vote to approve it without hearing from the public because they claimed they had ample evidence from the first meeting when, the one that the AG said was discounted. So they didn't need to hear from the public. Plus, attendance was very low because there was very little notice, and they still packed the room with the firemen and the cops. It appears that the AG didn't take the time to demand that the council actually take public statement. They just told them they have to have another meeting. It seems this is a familiar tactic of that local council because they did it back in 2019 over the purchase of water by a neighboring town's power plant. It was Barrelville. Johnston did the same thing and approved buying this water from the neighboring town. I don't know, but anyhow, that's that's your local councils, anyways. We have section 8, and then we're done with the listen, and I just have a couple of comments after. So if anyone wants to join up, you can start requesting now.
Mass transit. The transportation system provides another example of how private profit takes precedence over public need. Up until the 1920s, the transporting of passengers and goods was done mostly by electric car and railroad. Mass transit. Rails use only a fraction of the fuel consumed by cars and trucks. But these very efficiencies are what made them so undesirable to the oil and automotive industries. Consider the fate of Los Angeles. In 1935, that city was served by one of the finest rail systems in the world, covering a 75-mile radius with quiet, pollution-free electric trains that carried 80 million passengers a year. But General Motors and Standard Oil, using dummy corporations as fronts, purchased the system and replaced the electric cars with GM buses fueled by Standard Oil. By 1955, the corporations had replaced electric streetcar networks with gas-guzzling high-emission buses in over 100 cities across the nation. Then they cut back on city and suburban bus services to encourage mass dependency on cars. In 1949, General Motors was found guilty of conspiracy in these activities and fined the crushing sum of $5,000.53. Motor vehicles extract a staggering social cost. In the United States, about 42,000 people are killed in motor vehicle accidents every year, and well over 3 million are injured, many of them seriously incapacitated for the remainder of their lives. Auto accidents are the leading cause of death for people between the ages of 15 and 34. As of 2009, upwards of 3.6 million Americans have perished on the roads, more than twice the number killed in all the wars fought in the nation's history, about 120 a day. This figure does not usually include deaths that occur several days or weeks later from injuries originally sustained in the auto accident. Motor vehicles also kill 1 million animals each day. More deer are slaughtered by cars than by hunters. More than half the land in U.S. cities is taken up by the movement, parking, and servicing of vehicles. The suburban sprawl made possible by cars wipes out the surrounding farm communities and necessitates higher per capita costs for sewage and water system construction and, in turn, still greater dependency on auto vehicles. Federal, state, and local governments spend over $300 billion annually on road construction and maintenance, highway patrols, and ambulance and hospital services related to automotive mishaps. The automobile is one of the greatest causes of air pollution in urban areas and of global warming throughout the world. An estimated 30,000 deaths yearly are caused by automotive emissions. Rubber tire and oil slick runoffs and the tons of salt poured on winter roads cause trees and vegetation to wither while damaging bays and rivers. The average vehicle generates 700 pounds of air pollution and 4 tons of carbon just in its manufacture. Auto companies have done little to develop zero-emission vehicles, falsely claiming there is insufficient demand. If anything, car dealers and the general public have long been asking for affordable zero-emission vehicles. Medical costs for auto victims are enormous, as are the costs of a court system that litigates so many vehicular injury cases. As much as 1/5 of the average household's income is expended on car payments, auto insurance, gasoline, servicing, repairs, parking, and other auto-related costs. Those who are unable to drive, the elderly, the disabled, and the young, are frequently isolated by a car-dominated transport system. One thing that would help is more mass transit. Railroads, subways, and metro lines are vastly more efficient and less damaging to the environment. Health and Human Services, Sacrificial Lambs 89. than cars and trucks, but they receive proportionately far less in subsidies. Amtrak, our public rail system, provides much-needed intercity passenger service at relatively minimal cost. Yet in 2009 Amtrak received all of $1.6 billion in appropriations from Congress, about what the Pentagon spends in a day. The Obama stimulus bill of 2009 did provide $8 billion for Amtrak for much-needed repairs and upkeep. And Congress started preparing a 6-year, multi-billion-dollar plan that would allocate more funds for public transit and less for new roads and highways. More funds are needed also to repair our bridges, 1 in 4 of which are structurally deficient or functionally obsolete. We need to spend $250 billion to fix our aging water pipes and sewers, an additional billions of dollars for our telecommunications system, airports, tunnels, and national parks. Many of the enormous allocations that go for bombs and bailouts could be put to more useful and needed purpose.
All right, so that was chapter 7. We finished with the listening. I just have a few notes on that. I wanted to say that, going through that, I live in a town that there's no transit here. My next door neighbor, who is a caregiver for her mother who has dementia, found out a year ago that they are going blind. Well, they're not blind, and they're blind enough not. They took her license away, but not blind enough, to get all the services and everything yet. So, she's stuck. She can't. She's supposed to be caregiving for her mother, and she would go out and do the errands and stuff like that, and can't do that. So, I've stepped up. Her sisters, come up and help too, but I have to take her around now. But that's without having public transit. It's, impossible for so many people to get places. And then, you just have the rural places, forget it, if you don't have a car, you can't get anywhere. All right. So the U.S. car industry used lobbying and strategic infrastructure planning to undermine our public transportation in favor of car ownership. The National City Lines was a public transportation company set up in the 1920s. In 1936, the company was organized into a holding company and pushed to rid the cities of streetcars and replace them with buses. And they were funded by GM, Firestone Tire, Standard Oil of California, and Phillips Petroleum. They started buying out other transit companies that ran streetcars in Illinois, Oklahoma, and Michigan, then moved on to, Montana, Mississippi, and Texas soon after. A lot of the times these streetcar systems were running perfectly fine when they went into those cities. This is how destabilized transit for the cities it operated in. Okay, this is how this whole endeavor, destabilized transit. I wrote how instead of whole. All right, this whole endeavor destabilized transit for the cities to operate in. Okay, they underfunded public transportation to put money into highway building. The car industry heavily lobbied for and benefited from the massive highway construction projects funded by the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. This infrastructure prioritized cars, making them more convenient and accessible, while simultaneously destroying public transit. This took away from the poor who relied on public transit and couldn't afford to buy a car, and this is still a problem today. Jaywalking was even a made-up law in the 1920s, making the streets open for the car, where the car was king and people were shamed for trying to walk down the streets. But also yet another poor tax, like we talked about in the last chapter. And I don't know if Rick is in here because I'm going to bring this up. Yeah, I was talking about poor taxes, and Rick wrote in the comment section, phantom tax. So I'm old and I didn't understand what a phantom tax was, so I asked what a phantom tax is. So if you listen to that last episode and you're all laughing at me because I don't know what a phantom tax is, I'm just old and I know what a phantom tax is now, so thank you. And what has this car-centric attitude brought us? Pollution, more headaches with traffic, and a higher inequality rate. Okay. So, does anyone want to come up and talk? If you want to come up and talk, now's the time. Otherwise, I'm going to be shutting down in a minute. I'm contemplating doing this only once a week, but I would like to keep, well, I think for the next 6 weeks. So I have 12 more chapters here in Democracy for a Few. I'm going to try to keep doing it twice a week. But, you know, I may move it down because I am doing some other projects too now. You know, I got my Historically is back up and running. We're doing Lit with Lenin on Sundays, and I do Boys Club with Collective. But, you know, we're only supposed to be doing like a show a month or something, but, you know, I don't know. That may move up too. We may do a little bit more, which tomorrow night, I just have to finish editing it and get it up there. But tomorrow night, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time at night, PM, we will have an episode up for Boys Club for Collective on the Collective YouTube channel. So you should check that out. It's about misogyny, so it should be wonderful. So it's a good episode. It wasn't easy for us to talk about. So I do hope you all watch it. So I will talk to you all later. Thank you for coming, and I will see you. I was just about to say see you next Tuesday. I probably shouldn't say that, but that is when I'm scheduled for the next one. All right. Talk to you all later.